Tear it down, rebuild, start over. How many times a day do we hear this? And it's about various teams, right? They should just tear it down, do a rebuild. Why don't they just tear the whole thing down? You know what? Just do a rebuild. Here's the problem. There are a lot of teams in the league right now we could qualify as rebuilders. So what I wanted to do today was look at the 7 teams that missed the playoffs last year. 7 teams that officially didn't make the play-in round. So we're going to start with these 7 because they were at the bottom of the standings last season. Win percentage, they were at the bottom. So I've gone alphabetically here, and really it's a matter of looking at, so where are they in their rebuild? And so let me know in the comment section below where you think some of these teams are and whether or not any of the 7 make the playoffs this year. Keeping in mind, being in the lower quarter of the league, it is difficult to make that leap into the playoffs, and I would think that especially in a season like this one, that makes it, I think, more difficult. So we're going to start off with Anaheim. The last time they made the playoffs was 2018. They're really starting the rebuild. They're, a couple years into officially being in this state. They're 6-10-3 right now. Things are getting kind of frustrating because their goal scoring, their intensity, their consistency, everything is an issue right now. If you look at players who are 23 and under on this team, you've got Terry, you've got Lundstrom. Lundstrom, there's still some upside there. Terry, I'm not sure the scoring is going to show up. Zegras, of course, makes his debut on the team currently. Jones, I don't know if he's ever going to reach his peak. Steele, I'm having the same concerns with. Comtois has shown some growth this year as a goal scorer. Larson, good, respectable, top 6 defenseman. Mahura, I think will become the same. Gooley, who's currently injured. And their starting goaltender is John Gibson, who's 27 years of age. And I'm going to say straight out, Gibson's not going anywhere. If the Ducks come out tomorrow and say, well, we're open for business, if somebody calls about Gibson, I would think they just hang up the phone. Their prospects of note, and again, this isn't, all of their prospects, but Perreault may end up being a steal out of this year's draft, 2020 being this year's. Jamie Drysdale, excellent defenseman as well. Dostal is going to be a fantastic goaltender by all accounts. And Tracy. So, well, they're not listening to anybody on Gibson right now. If Dostal comes out, I'll say over the next 2 years and ends up being a really good backup and develops, I could see them listening to offers. At that point, Gibson would be 29 years of age. And yeah, I mean, there's some reason to be optimistic if you're Anaheim. They have to get out from underneath some of the contracts they still have around. Getzlaf's being one of them. But they're at least, I would think, 2 years away from really coming out of this rebuild. I would think 2 seasons. Because Drysdale probably comes up next year, right? Zegras is going to get his feet wet this year. And the rush to judgment on prospects and on teenagers is insane from media and fans both. So I reserve judgment until somebody's been in the league for at least a few years. But yeah, there are some good pieces here, but I think they need some more depth to back that up. Buffalo, yep, last playoffs were 2011. They're 5-8-2 currently. 23 and under players on the team. Tage Thompson, Cousins, of course, his rookie year. Middlestad, who's been disappointing, but he's looked better lately. And I think Dylan Cousins is going to be a star in the league. Darlene is an excellent young defenseman. He's going through his challenges this year as well. Yoki Haru, I think, was a steal from the Chicago Blackhawks for them. And their starting goaltender's Ullmark, who's 27 years of age. How good is Ullmark? Is Ullmark a guy that you can look at and say, all right, 5 years from now, he should still be the starter, or do you look somewhere else? And if you're a fan of Buffalo, you say, hey, wait, 5 years from now, we're covered. May very well be, because Luukkonen, you'd have to think, will be coming up well before that. Quinn may end up being a steal from this past draft as well. Johnson, the last piece of the trade for Ryan O'Reilly. No pressure, kid. And Peterka. Peterka looked excellent for the German team at the World Juniors. Maybe he makes his debut for Buffalo next year. The interesting thing with Buffalo is they're supposed to be already out of their rebuild. Notice Eichel is not 23 years of age or younger. He's older than that. And so the expectation for Eichel and for the Sabres was that they were supposed to be coming out of this by now. And so they already have a decent young core there. It's a matter of being able to surround guys like Reinhart and Eichel. And now, Hall's been brought in. It gets tricky fast, doesn't it? So this is sort of that cautionary tale. I use Buffalo's cautionary tale about, hey, just the whole tear it down and start over. Be careful, because that's essentially what they decided to do. And then they did a full tear everything out in 2015 to try to tank it so that they could get Connor McDavid. And I don't think that helped things either. They ended up getting Eichel in that draft instead of McDavid. And while Eichel is an excellent player, the damage done by that regime, I think, is still felt within the organization. And remember, there's a new general manager right now, so you can't throw any kind of negativity towards a general manager who took over the job mere months ago. Detroit, their last playoffs were 2016. They're 5-12-3. This feels like a long rebuild. Part of it is because their first round draft picks, it's been a mixed bag, right? So a team known for excellent drafting, and over the last 5 years, there's been some misses in there. So Zadina is under the 23 and under that are currently on the roster. Hronik and McIsaac is listed as being on the roster. He's on, of course, injured reserve and all that, but they're listed as being part of the roster on cap friendly. Their starting goaltender's Bernier, who's 32 years of age. And it's weird because they don't have a young roster because all of their prospects are being held back. And I think Yzerman's making the right call here. Veleno, Rasmussen is currently not on the roster. He has been on the roster. I don't know if Rasmussen's ever going to reach the levels he was expected to when he was drafted. Moritz Seider, all reports would seem to indicate this guy's going to be an excellent defenseman when he joins the team. Chalowski has taken a step back. He's now back in the minors. Lindstrom, I like Lindstrom a lot. I don't think the offense is there, but he's good defensively, so you don't always need the offense. Raymond, of course, has garnered a lot of attention since the draft and may end up being the steal of the draft. Giovanni Smith, he's currently in the minors. He's played on the team this year at times. There's some potential there. I don't know how much offense he'll provide. Wallinder may end up being a steal. And Berggren. Berggren has put up some pretty good totals so far in his juniors and playing over in Europe. And so we'll see when he comes over to play in the NHL how it works out for him. But for Detroit, I want to say things are going to get better. I know last year I kept saying, hey, this has to be the bottom. This year they're 5-12-3, and it kind of feels the same, although the effort is there. I've been saying that. They do have a lot of veteran players, which is why they're 23 and under is kind of lacking in players right now, but their prospect list is a lot. And then if they end up getting a top 3 prospect this year and or next year, that helps as well. And this it feels like this is the full teardown. This is what that looks like. And they've filled up the roster with veteran players who won't be there when they actually come out of the rebuild in all likelihood. LA. I'm wearing a Kings jersey and Kings hat because it's interesting. They last made the playoffs in 2018. That's not that long ago. They've gone through a couple of very lean years. They're currently 8-6-3. They're on a 5-game winning streak as I record this. Their 23 and under group isn't bad. Austin Wagner, good player. Lazot's solid top 9. Velarde is starting to take that step. Remember, Velarde, nothing but injuries after he was drafted. So there really wasn't any reason to call him a bust because he wasn't playing hockey. Can't be a bust if you're not playing hockey. So, unless you've retired. But for Velarde, he's come through that and he's been really good. And he's on a 4-game point streak again as I'm recording this. Anderson Dolan has been very good for them as well. And so the fact that some of what has helped this team get into a 5-game winning streak is that youth combined with the veterans that are still around, like Kopitar, like Brown, like Carter, like Doughty, and Quick. That says a lot. Grundstrom has been good. Luff, fringe player, but okay. Anderson, that's Mikey Anderson on the blue line, solid. Bjornfot has the potential to be a top 4. Then there's Elias Anderson. I don't know that it's going to work out, but he's still on the roster. And Kupari as well, who is, he's also in the prospect pool technically because I don't think he's made his debut yet in the NHL. But he's still listed as being on the taxi squad, so I was like, well, I'll throw him on the 23 and under part of the board. And I've Cal Peterson there at age 26. Now, technically, Quick is still the guy. Like, Quick showed that last night. He is still the starter. But Peterson at age 26, one of the younger goaltenders on this board, and I think he's going to be very good for them for a long time. So their prospects, you have Turcotte, you have Kaliev, Madden, Byfield. There may be certain levels of panic about how Byfield or Turcotte perform in the American League. There shouldn't be. They're still very young players. And so any concerns about them, really, you have to kind of weigh that with the fact that they're very young. Kaliev, of course, had a goal in his debut as a King. Madden, we'll see whether or not he ends up coming up to play in the NHL, but that was a prospect they picked up for Toffoli, who wasn't going to re-sign in LA anyways. Akil Thomas, Fagamo's there as well, and Helge Grans, who is seen as maybe one of those guys who would get drafted later that teams would say, why did we pass on Grans? And so there's a lot of good prospects there for the Kings. And what's interesting is you've got all these prospects, you've already got a lot of young players on the team, and they're starting to win. So of the 7 teams on the board, they're the one team that has a relatively respectable record. Now, people will point out, hey, they've won 8 out of 17. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. Agreed. But at the same time, they're in the running. And so they're keeping things interesting, and we'll see whether or not they can remain in the hunt. New Jersey, also a team that's kind of in the hunt, depending on what happens over the next couple of weeks and how they handle this really condensed schedule they're going to have. So their last playoffs, 2018, same as the LA Kings. The interesting thing with New Jersey, though, is that was after being out of the playoffs for a while. So for New Jersey, this has been a long rebuild for them as well. Their 23 and under group for the 6-5-2 team includes Hischier, who's now their captain. I don't have any problem with him being named captain of this team. Bratt, who's been really good this year. Zacha, who's finally starting to show some signs of the offense over the last few games. Hughes, excellent second season for Hughes. McLeod, again, that's one of those. He's drafted in the first round. May not be what he was drafted to become, but may become a solid NHLer. Kuokkanen, who's kind of come out of nowhere. He was acquired in a trade with Carolina. Looks pretty good so far this year. Bastian, fringe, fourth line kind of player. And Ty Smith, who's been amazing on the blue line for the New Jersey Devils. Their goaltender, the youngest on the board, Mackenzie Blackwood, age 24, and he's been fantastic. Blackwood has been one of the best goaltenders in the league, and at some point, New Jersey's going to be in the playoffs, and he's going to win a Vezina trophy for it. Their prospects, Mercer, could end up being a steal for them where they got him. Foote, who they picked up from Tampa. Holtz could be an absolute wrecking ball for them over the near future as well. Speaking of which, there's Ball there. Kevin Ball is a very big defenseman. If he ever plays, that's excellent. And then as well, Mahatmadulin, who played well for the Russians, and with a name like that, he has to come over and play and be a good player. Because at some point, at some time, I want to take a New Jersey Devils jersey and get that name put on the back, because you've got to get your money's worth when you're getting name and number put on the back of a jersey. So I want Luukkonen, I should say, for Buffalo, Mahatmadulin coming up for New Jersey. I want that to happen. That'd be fantastic. All right. So New Jersey, they may very well have gone through the worst of it. This may be a year where, they might make some noise. And even if they don't, it is the division of death. And I'll say this to Buffalo fans as well. It is a really, really tough division. So if this year doesn't quite work out the way you want it to, you kind of grit your teeth and go, all right, when we go back to a regular season in 2021, 2022, then we may have learned from being in this division of death how to get better next year. We'll see. Ottawa, their last playoffs were 2017, famously 2017, and then we went into this rebuild, and we're into year 4 of it now. And so the question becomes one of, are they better off now than they were at the beginning? Well, there's a lot of young prospects here. The question mark becomes, okay, so you've acquired all these young bodies, all these young guys. Now you have to have the right veterans to bring them to that next level. And it's something that I know for the Oilers, they've struggled with that. There are other teams that have struggled with that over the years too, where you get all these young players, and then it's a matter of finding the right combination of veterans to accentuate that and to make that work. So they're 5-14-1. They've had some good stretches in terms of their play, not necessarily the record, but in terms of their play. Their 23 and under is a small list, but it's got Stützle, Norris, Kachuk, Batherson, Brandstrom. So Stützle, Norris, and Kachuk should be three guys who are in that top six for a long time to come. Batherson starting to make that argument himself as well. Brandstrom should be a top four defenseman for them. Considering what they gave up to get Brandstrom, it's really important that he develops. Matt Murray's their goaltender. He's been signed for 4 years. He's 26 years of age. And yeah, so Murray, his numbers are not great, obviously. We know this. We've discussed this in videos as well. But for Matt Murray, he's still young. He's still able to bounce back. And there's still a young guy in the system. And even if Hogberg isn't necessarily an NHL level goaltender, I don't think that holds him back a lot either. So their prospects, Ridley Gregg, be interesting to see how he develops. Sanderson, of course, has been tearing things up in the NCAA with an eye on probably turning pro. I'll say not necessarily this year, probably next year. I would think probably next year, but with that amount of talent and where he was drafted, the temptation to turn pro this year could be there. Formenton as well. He is. We'll see if he comes up and plays for them. I'm kind of surprised not playing for them now, as well as Logan Brown. Logan Brown's been kind of waiting his turn, and I don't know if Logan Brown ends up being a part of this team when they start making that rise, but Brown could be used to acquire another piece that could help with that. Lassie Thompson, Gustafsson. Gustafsson's that young goaltender who could eventually be the starter for them as well. And Bernard Docker, another blue liner, who, yeah, he's a blue chip prospect, and so there's a lot of good prospects there, and there's a lot of talk about how Ottawa's blue line's going to be great, but we have to remember as well, when you're looking at prospects and talking about prospects, not all of them are going to develop, not all of them are going to end up being what is expected. So we'll see. There's a lot of we'll see with Ottawa, but it feels like this is another year of that build, and then maybe next year they start getting better. Of course, with the idea that the owner is going to start getting more frustrated with each year if this continues. San Jose. So the most interesting one on the board might end up being San Jose for the simple fact that they're not treating this like they need to rebuild. They're 7-8-2. Their last playoffs were in 2019. And they still don't seem to have the attitude that they need to do any kind of a rebuild with their team at all. Now, to me, the interesting thing with San Jose is they're 7-8-2, right? So 2019, their last time in the playoffs. And there's contracts there. There's Carlson, there's Burns. Those are the big ones, right? They're spending a lot of money on that blue line. And so with the amount of money being spent, I don't think the admission they're in a rebuild is going to happen. Although they didn't make the play-in round last year, and right now I don't think they make the playoffs. I don't see a scenario where I think that happens. And I do wonder if something gives at the end of this year. Now, there are some young players on the roster. 23 and under for this 7-8-2 team that did start their first 12 games on the road, and they did well. They finished 5-6-1 in 12 road games. Remarkable that they had that long road trip. But they're 23 and under. Leonard, who looks like he's quite a find for the team. Gregor Balsers, who was picked up from Ottawa. And again, young player. Originally their property in the first place, so they just bring him back. Mario Ferraro, decent defenseman. Knizhov, decent player, good player. I'm not sure on the upside with Knizhov. Milosh, kind of forgotten prospect that's now in their lineup. Again, some of these guys are here because injury issues with the San Jose Sharks and whatnot. Jones is their starting goaltender, age 31. I've talked about Martin Jones a lot. And their goaltending is always an issue. Their defense seems to always be an issue. And they don't seem to have any desire to really completely fix it. They brought in Dubnyk. They let go of Dell. Dubnyk had worse stats last year than Dell. It's one of those moves that they make, and I think, oh, okay. Now, Donato's been a good pickup. Donato's not old. He's not 23 or under. He's not old. But again, I don't know how you fix what's going on with San Jose. Their prospects, it's not a prospect list of top tier next guy talent. So you've got Weisblatt, Robbins, Merkley, and Bordelot are their most prominent prospects. So the interesting thing is, if you look at these teams and you say, okay, on the prospect list, who's like the next guy or who could be a transformative kind of player? For Anaheim, you've got Drysdale, who may end up being that kind of defenseman for them. You've got Dostal, who may end up being that goaltender. For Buffalo, Peterka may end up being a pretty good NHL top 6 player. Quinn could have pretty excellent offensive instincts and goal scoring. And Luukkonen could be and should be their next starter. For Detroit, you've got Seider, good top four defenseman. Lindstrom, as I've said, excellent defensive defenseman. Raymond, who's an explosive forward. They're going to love him when he arrives in Detroit. Berggren could have that as well. For LA, you've got Turcotte, you've got Kaliev, you've got Byfield up front, Akil Thomas up front, and you've got Grons on the blue line. And it's overall, it's a pretty good prospect pool for the Kings. For the Devils, again, Mahat Madulin and Mercer are 2 first-rounders from this year to keep an eye on, and Holtz. Holtz could really be the key guy for them at some point soon. For Ottawa, you've got, on top of the guys who are already in the lineup, Blake Stützle, who is going to be a star. Sanderson, I'll say Bernard Docker as well. Greg, sure, in terms of blue-chip prospects. And then with San Jose, I'm not sure. Weisblatt, maybe. And Merkley has an opportunity to maybe be a top 4 defenseman at some point. But again, that's where it gets interesting, because I can go through all these teams and say, yep, there's signs these teams have done the rebuild and they're going right. San Jose, not as much. And then the ones that are supposed to be in rebuilds that aren't on the board. Rangers may very well still be rebuilding. And I've got Chicago with a question mark, because they were supposed to be a rebuilding team. They were one of the very lowest seeds to qualify, of course. They were 12th in the West. Would have been on this board if they'd been one spot below that. But this year they've been pretty good. So are they in need of a rebuild or not? Did they sidestep that with some of the rookies they've picked up this year? Maybe rebuilds. Nashville, currently a team that's being looked at as they might be tearing things down to rebuild it. And teams that are supposed to be out of the rebuild, but maybe they're not, Vancouver and Arizona, I have listed as teams that are supposed to be out of the rebuild, but maybe it's not done yet. And again, this is why when somebody goes, I think this team should just tear it down and start over, there's a lot of teams in that category, and you got to be careful because it can be really tough to dig your way out. So here's the question. Let's just take the Kings that I'm wearing off the board here. If any of these other 6 teams is going to make the playoffs next, I'm not necessarily talking about in 2021 either, because I don't know that any of these get there, but which team's closest to getting back to the playoffs other than the Kings, which I think would probably be the most popular answer right now. Let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.